Once upon a time in the peaceful village of Mbale, life moved gently like a slow river. Surrounded by tall trees and singing birds, the people lived in harmony. They followed their customs with pride, especially one rule they held dear. It was the rule of purity, and to the people of Mbale it wasn't just a belief. It was honor, respect, legacy. Fathers walked proudly through the market saying, "My daughter is pure, just like all our daughters." Mothers nodded, holding their heads high. But one day, everything changed. Misfortune fell upon the village. The sky stayed dark for days. Goats refused to eat. Crops withered before harvest. The river grew quiet. The elders went to the shrine, seeking answers. And the spirits answered. Only a pure maiden could lift the curse. The gods would send a test. A sacred necklace hidden inside a clay pot. Only a virgin could reach in and pull it out. As a reward, the chosen girl would marry the prince, and her parents would be showered with gold, land, and glory. The news spread like fire. Every parent, sure of their daughter's purity, rushed to the palace. "This is our chance," they whispered. "Our girl will marry royalty." The village square was filled with laughter and hope. Then Danga, the king's trusted seer, stepped forward holding a wide-mouthed clay pot. His voice was firm. "Inside this pot is the necklace of truth. Only a maiden untouched by any man can bring it out." The girls lined up. Some smiled shyly, some trembled, but all of them believed. One by one they stepped forward and dipped their hands. Nothing. Not a sound from the pot. No necklace. Another girl tried, then another, and another. The pot remained silent. The crowd, once cheerful, now grew tense. Eyes darted. Mothers clenched their wrappers. Then came the turn of the chief's daughters, known across Mbale for their grace and beauty. The first daughter stepped forward with pride. She dipped her hand. Nothing. The second came. Her hand trembled. Still, nothing. Finally, the youngest, no older than 15, walked to the pot, eyes wide with fear. She knelt, reached in. Silence. The crowd gasped. Whispers rose like wind through dry leaves. "Not even the chief's daughters," someone said. "What is going on?" The elders looked at one another. Their faces were pale with confusion. "How can this be?" A mother cried. "These are our daughters," another said. "Raised in the old ways, they must be pure." But none of the girls had found the necklace. Then the shouting began. "It's her fault," one of the girls cried, pointing. "It's Auntie Noma." The crowd turned. A woman stood near the back. Her skin smooth like river stone, her dress made of shiny red fabric that shimmered in the sun. Noma, the stranger from the city. She had arrived in Mbale months ago to visit her aunt. Her hair was always styled. Her clothes were tight and colorful. Her smile, bold. Her walk, confident. She wasn't like the women of Mbale. And the girls had noticed. "She's the reason," another girl said. "Before she came, we never dressed like that. We never talked like that. Look what she taught our daughters," an old woman muttered. "City ways, no shame." Another nodded. "Our girls looked up to her too much, now see what's happened." And so the tale began. Long ago, or not so long depending on who told it, Noma came from the city to Mbale. She was beautiful. Her eyes sparkled. Her nails were painted. Her skirts hugged her legs like they were stitched by the spirits. She walked like royalty. The men in the village could not stop looking. "Who is she?" they whispered. "Look at how she walks. Look at those clothes." Even the elders looked twice. The girls in the village watched too, eyes wide. They whispered to one another, "I want to dress like Noma. She's so pretty. She doesn't care what anyone thinks." Before Noma came, the girls of Mbale wore wrappers that reached their ankles and never spoke unless spoken to. But now, they watched Noma closely. They followed her movements. They copied her smiles. They wanted to be seen like she was, They didn't know much about her, but she made them feel things they hadn't felt before. Excitement, boldness, possibility. "Noma is amazing," one girl sighed. "I want to be just like her." But what they didn't know was her secret. Noma was not just walking through the village. She was meeting with the men who praised her. Some brought her kola nuts. Others brought earrings and fine wrappers, but the gifts were not free. Noma gave them attention. More than attention. She met them in corners where the moonlight couldn't reach. She spent time with them in ways the village would never accept. And the girls? They didn't know the full truth. But they noticed the attention Noma got. They noticed how boys who once ignored them now looked at them differently when they dressed like her. They began to change. It was slow, but it spread. Then one day Asabe, one of the chief's daughters, walked past her father's courtyard wearing a blouse that showed her shoulders. The women gasped. "What is this?" the chief shouted. But it was too late. A change had begun, and now, after the failed test, all fingers pointed to Noma. The elders gathered. The people shouted. The wind carried fear. Mbale had never seen such shame. And in the middle of it all stood the pot, still holding the necklace, waiting for the one who could reach it. As days passed, Asabe, the chief's daughter, grew more curious about Noma. She noticed how Noma always wore new clothes, bracelets that jingled, and even perfume from the city, but no one ever saw her buying anything. So one evening, Asabe followed her. She stayed quiet, hiding behind trees and huts, until she saw Noma walking quickly toward a hidden corner of the forest path. There, a man waited. They spoke in whispers. He handed Noma a small cloth pouch. She opened it, peeked inside, and smiled. Then she turned and walked away. Asabe's heart beat fast. So that's her secret, she thought. The men give her gifts for spending time with them. Asabe sat alone that night thinking. She had always been a good girl, the perfect daughter. But now she felt invisible, boring. Noma seemed powerful, adored. The men smiled at her. The girls followed her. Asabe wanted that feeling too. The next day she spotted a young trader from the river town, a man who had been stealing glances at her for weeks. She remembered what she saw Noma do. Would it work for her too? She approached him with a soft smile. They spoke briefly. Then they agreed to meet later in secret. That night, Asabe returned with bangles and coins. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were wide with wonder. This is so easy, she thought. I can have nice things too. She couldn't keep the secret to herself. Soon she whispered it to her closest friend. Noma meets men in secret, and they give her gifts. I tried it. It works. Her friends gasped. But then they leaned closer. Are you sure? Yes. Asabe said. All you have to do is be nice to them. They give you what you want. One by one, curiosity bloomed. The girls began to follow Noma's path, painting their lips, tying their wrappers tighter, brushing their hair in ways that caught the sunlight just right. They started to wear beads on their ankles, oil their skin with scented palm butter, and laugh louder when men passed. It wasn't long before Noma noticed. She saw the change in their eyes, the way they carried themselves. She smiled. Then she made an offer. I can help, she said. I know which. Men have gifts. I can arrange meetings. You just have to be sweet. In return, she took a portion of the gifts. At first, the girls hesitated, but the promise of new wrappers, hair oils, earrings, and it was too tempting. They agreed. And so a quiet change swept through Mbale. Girls who once fetched water shyly now lingered at the well. They spoke to traders with fluttering eyes. They returned home with things their mothers never gave them. Their world had shifted and they liked it. They felt special. Not just because of what they received, but because of how they were seen, loved, wanted. The village's teachings about purity, patience, and honor began to fade. The gifts glowed brighter than the old warnings. Soon, It was more than a few girls, it was many. It became a secret club. They didn't tell their parents, they didn't speak about it at village gatherings. They smiled during chores and joined dances at festivals like everything was normal. But behind closed doors, their lives were different. They were breaking the sacred rule and didn't feel guilty. To them, it wasn't sin, it was freedom. The elders noticed nothing. They walked through the village praising their traditions. They boasted, "Our daughters are pure, our customs are strong." They believed the old ways still ruled. But those days were gone. The rule of purity, once the pride of Mbale, was being buried in silence. And then came the reckoning. One day, the leaves on the trees turned dry. Crops began to bend, their stems weak. The goats refused to rise from the shade. Then the chickens stopped laying. Then the rivers slowed. And then the people began to fall sick. One child, then a mother. Then a man with a strong back and a loud voice. Silent now. The illness was strange. No one could explain it. People grew pale. They coughed. They cried out in the night. The village grew cold, even as the sun stayed hot. Mothers wept. Fathers searched the skies for answers. "We've always done what's right," they cried. "We've honored the gods," they shouted. But still, the darkness spread. Desperate, the villagers gathered under the great Iroko tree. The elders knelt and pounded their walking sticks on the ground. "We must ask Baba Agaja," they said. He was the oracle, the only one who spoke to the spirits. He lived at the edge of the forest, his house wrapped in vines and silence. They walked to him in a line of fear. They brought kola nuts and a white chicken. Baba Agaja stepped out slowly, his eyes cloudy, his hair gray, his voice like dry leaves. Brushing each other, he listened to the elders. He watched the shaking hands. He nodded. Then he told them to wait. He entered his hut. There was no sound. Minutes passed, then hours. Finally, he returned. His eyes burned with something sharp. "The gods are angry," he said. "Their law has been broken." Gasps filled the air. "Which law?" someone cried. "The sacred rule," he said. "The one your daughters have forgotten." Murmurs rippled like water over stone. Purity has been thrown away like palm husks. The old ways have been mocked in secret. The people stared. "What must we do?" the chief asked. "The gods demand a sacrifice," Baba Agaja said, "but it must come from clean hands. Only a maiden, truly untouched, can bring the cure." And that's when the elders remembered the necklace, and the pot, and the girls who failed. A silence heavier than thunder covered Mbale. The truth was no longer hiding. The shame was waking. When the villagers asked Baba Agaja how to stop the curse, he listened without a word. His eyes were closed, his face still as stone. The wind outside grew still too, as if the earth itself waited. Finally, he opened his mouth. "The gods are angry," Baba Agaja said, his voice grave like thunder underwater. "They are displeased. The traditions have been broken. The purity once honored here has been thrown into the dust." Gasps filled the air. "To bring peace back," he continued, "a great sacrifice must be made. 2 untouched maidens must carry it to the sacred altar deep in the forest." The crowd fell silent. Sacrifice was no small matter, but 2 untouched girls? That was something sacred. Something they thought they had in plenty. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. These were men who had always walked tall, boasting that their daughters were pure like clear water, but now, even they looked unsure. Baba Agaja's voice grew low. "The offering must be made within 2 days. If not, the curse will spread, and your suffering will multiply." The villagers left Baba's compound with heavy feet and heavier hearts. There was no time to waste. They needed to find 2 untouched girls, in a village that once took pride in raising them by the dozen. But now, doubt crawled over their skin like ants. Could they still trust what they once believed? That morning, the town crier walked through every path in Mbale. ringing his brass bell and shouting, "All young maidens, come to the palace. All young maidens, come for the test." His voice echoed off clay walls. Women paused in their cooking. Fathers looked up from their tools. Everyone knew this was about the sacrifice, and the village's only chance at survival. The next day, the palace was full. Every girl came with her parents, dressed in their best, beads in their hair, wrappers tied tight, eyes uncertain. Baba Agaja stood beside the sacred pot, the same pot holding the necklace of truth. One by one, the girls stepped forward, and once again, one by one, the pot remained still. No necklace, no sign, no blessing. Not a single girl passed the test. The whispers returned. The elders began to tremble. Baba Agaja turned to the people and spoke again, his voice a thunderclap through the stillness. "The gods see everything. Their anger is just. This is not punishment. This is justice." The village stared in disbelief. Not a single virgin remained. Every parent turned to look at their daughters. Some began to weep. Some looked away. Mbale, the village that once boasted of purity, now stood shamed before the gods. And slowly, all fingers pointed toward Noma. She had become the name on every tongue, the reason in every whisper, the shadow behind every fallen leaf. "She brought this," the women cried. "She turned our daughters against tradition," the men growled. The girls who had followed Noma now stayed quiet, hiding behind mothers and headscarves, but their silence was loud. Back in the city, Noma's parents soon heard the storm their daughter had stirred. Her father, a stern man known for his discipline, was furious. "We should have raised her better," he said. "We let the rope run too long, and now it has knotted our necks." Her mother, who had once smiled proudly at Noma's boldness, now felt only regret. "I let her do as she pleased because she was our only child," she whispered. "And now, look what she's done." In the village, Noma stood alone, once admired, now hated. The weight of their blame crushed her chest. She had never meant for things to go this far, but now she saw the pain, the sick children, the dying crops, and she knew. This was her doing. The elders met in secret. They sat beneath the tall kola tree and spoke in low voices. Their eyes tired, their hearts broken. Something had to be done, and so they returned to the palace and made a declaration. Since no pure maiden remains, Noma must carry the sacrifice herself. Gasps, cries, but no one stopped them. "Is the one who brought the trouble," they said. "Let her be the one to undo it." The next morning, the entire village gathered in the square. Noma was called to stand in the center. She walked forward slowly, her feet bare, her face pale with fear. She looked at the faces of those she once smiled at, now full of judgment. She looked for Asabe, but the chief's daughter turned away. She looked for the men who had once given her gifts, but they were nowhere to be found. She was alone, completely alone. The chief stood. Baba Agaja stood. Even the children stood still. "Noma of the city," the chief said, "you will carry the sacrifice to the altar of the gods, alone, as penance, for the pain you have caused." Noma nodded. She didn't argue. She didn't plead, because deep in her heart, she knew it was true. She had wandered far from the ways of Mbale, and now the path back would be one of fire. All eyes were on Noma. Every gaze in Mbale was filled with disappointment, some with anger, others with deep sorrow. Her parents, who had rushed from the city after hearing of the disaster, stood silently. They could not defend her, not this time. They could not shield her from the weight of her choices. Standing tall, Baba Agaja handed Noma a large calabash, filled with sacred items, kola nuts, palm oil, feathers, and bones of the sacred dove. "You must carry this to the altar of the gods," he said solemnly. "You will walk alone. This is your burden." Noma bowed her head. She lifted the heavy calabash onto her head, her body trembling under its weight, not just of the offering, but of shame. She walked through the same village where people once smiled at her bright clothes and bold steps. Now those same lips whispered curses, mothers shielded their daughters, fathers tightened their fists, but Noma kept walking. She stepped into the forest, and there the trees swallowed her, the sky dimmed, the air thickened. For 2 days, Noma walked, no sleep, no food, only thoughts and pain. Her feet were blistered, her throat dry, but her mind full. She remembered the gifts, the laughter of the men, the adoring eyes of the girls who wanted to be like her. She had felt powerful, beautiful, worshipped. But now she saw it all for what it was: empty, shallow, false. What she once thought was admiration had only led to destruction. Tears spilled down her face as she walked, not because of the forest or the thorns, but because of the hearts she had led astray. Because of the village that once stood proud, now wounded. At last she reached the altar, a small stone mound hidden beneath ancient trees, roots twisted like the arms of forgotten spirits. She placed the calabash upon it. She fell to her knees, and she wept. She cried for the village, for her parents, for the girls who followed her into a darkness they didn't understand. She begged the gods, "Please forgive me. Let Mbale be whole again." In that moment, the wind stilled. A silence swept, the forest deep and echoing. She felt something, not peace but presence. She stood. A quiet strength rose inside her. She knew she would never be the same, and she knew she would have to live with what she had done. But she was ready. She began her journey home. When Noma returned to Mbale, something was different. The villagers had gathered, watching from a distance. Some frowned, others stared, but the sky had softened, the wind had returned, and the cursed plants, they were green again. Leaves danced, birds chirped. The goats that had once laid still now walked. The people began to whisper, not with anger but wonder. The curse had lifted. Baba Agaja stood before them once more. "The gods have accepted the sacrifice," he declared. "But Noma must face judgment." He raised his staff. "For 12 years she shall not leave Mbale. She shall live near the shrine and serve the gods. Every offering, every prayer, every sacrifice, she shall carry them. This is her repentance." The villagers nodded. They were grateful the curse had ended, but their hearts still carried pain. As punishment, Noma was taken to a small hut, near the shrine, far from the market square and laughter of children. No one visited her. No one spoke her name unless in warning. She was an outcast. The once vibrant girl from the city now lived in silence, in shadows. Day after day she cleaned the shrine, carried offerings, lit the sacred fires, and poured libations. Her fingers grew rough, her voice quiet. But inside her, a slow, quiet change began. She thought often. She watched the sunrise alone. She whispered prayers she had never learned in the city. She no longer wore fine beads. Her wrappers were plain, her eyes softer. She lived her days reflecting on the choices she made and the lives she had altered. Meanwhile, the village worked to rebuild. The elders gathered the youth and began teaching once more. Purity, discipline, honor, respect. They no longer spoke of it with pride, but with caution, with humility. They feared how quickly values could fall apart. A new law was passed. No visitors from the city were to stay in Mbale unless the elders approved it. Noma's story became a warning. Children were told of the girl who came from the big city and brought beauty, but also ruin. A girl who taught others to chase false praise instead of true purpose. She was not evil, parents said, but she lost her way, and now she lived with that forever. For 12 long years, Noma remained in the village, alone, silent. Even when her parents sent letters asking her to return, she refused. She knew her place was there, to serve, to learn, to endure. The punishment was not just her body's burden. It was the lesson her soul had to carry. In her silence, she discovered something she had never found in all the parties, gifts, or mirrors from the city: peace. She learned that true worth was not in how others saw you, but how you lived even when no one was watching. And slowly, the village forgave her, not all at once, but with time. Some offered her food at the shrine, others began to greet her again. She never returned to her old self, but she became something else. Wiser, gentler, grounded. Noma's story was passed down, from mouth to ear, from elder to child. It was told not with hatred, but with warning. It was not just a sad tale. It was a lesson in humility, in forgiveness, in the strength of a culture that must be guarded. The village healed, but it never forgot.